Vнимание, vнимание. Hey guys, what's up? It's the Culture Detective here, investigating your favorite TV shows, and today I'm gonna do a review on the brand new Chernobyl HBO miniseries. A series that had been getting a lot of buzz lately because of how scary and realistic it is. It is essentially a 5-parted series about the time one of the reactor cores in Chernobyl nuclear power plant blew up and killed thousands upon thousands with radiation in Ukraine near Pripyat. The show is created by Craig Mazin, who's known for writing The Hangover and The Huntsman and now this. And I must say, this is a pretty stunning debut TV show for him. What's really stunning about this TV show is that it is nearly a 100% accurate reenactment of what really happened. Everything about the costumes, the vehicles, the props, the buildings, they're extremely accurate. According to Ukrainians born in the 70s and the 80s, we have Jared Harris playing as the main character, Valery Legasov, and the hero of Chernobyl. You may have seen him as James Moriarty in Robert Downey Jr.'s Sherlock Holmes and Mad Men as Lane Price. We also have Stellan Skarsgård playing Boris Shcherbyna. Episode 1 is titled 1:23:45 because it is the exact time the explosion happened on April 26, 1986. And the episode actually starts off with Legasov when he's old, recording a tape in his apartment talking about how there was nothing sane about Chernobyl. He was being watched, and then he hanged himself. Again. Then we rewind back to 2 years and 1 minute earlier when the explosion happened. And oh boy, it is intense, it's cataclysmic, it was destructive. In the nuclear plant control room, everybody already knew that this wasn't just any explosions. Actually, any explosions is already bad enough. But a reactor core explosion is so much more detrimental. So the workers were panicking, and the leader, Dyatlov, was being a real dick and was telling everybody that it's nothing, that it's no big deal. 3.6 roentgens, not great, not terrible. And the maximum value of the dosimeter they were using was literally 3.6, so 2000 IQ. Then they started to send firefighters there, and oh, they're fucked. Then Dyatlov bosses Fomin and Bryukhanov learned about this issue, and they were all like, nah, we got it all under control. It's fine, no need to panic. Then their bosses held a meeting with a bunch of others, and none of them were alarmed that it's actually that bad, with the exception of this one dude. There's a scene where the big boss said that they should seal the city, cut the phone lines, and keep the people there, and then they just all started to applaud, and it's actually ridiculous. After that, one power plant worker told Fomin and Bryukhanov that the reactor core wasn't there because it's gone. It blew up. And they were like, no, you're crazy. It didn't blow up. You didn't see graphite on the roof. You're crazy. And why don't you look at the reactor core and report us what you see? And then there's this scene where the guy were forced to look directly down at the exploded reactor core, knowing fully well that he's gonna die. Absolutely unpleasant to watch. Then at the very last couple of minutes of the episode, finally a hero showed up who really saw the truth, and he is Valery Legasov. Episode 2 is Please Remain Calm, and it takes on a different format of storytelling than the first episode. It's always satisfying to see Legasov trying his best to spread the truth. Then we have Boris Shcherbyna, who was just a total douchebag at the beginning, dismissing Legasov as a fool or as a lunatic. This episode actually starts off with a new character by the name of Yulana Homyuk. She's a nuclear physicist, and she worked at Minsk. And of course, we know that she's a fictional character. Her character really just represents all the other nuclear physicists at the time. I really like that Yulana made a phone call to a friend at Moscow or Moskva, and they basically spoke in codes. Her friend looked at the periodic table, looked at number 5 and 14 and said Boris and Cilia or something, and then Yolana was like, yeah, that means boron and sand. So they're talking in codes, and that's a really cool scene. Another scene that struck me was the scene where the general volunteered to measure the radiation outside the reactor with a dosimeter. Turns out it's 15,000 roentgens, not 3.6. The last scene was intense though. 3 men volunteered to go underneath the reactor core and release the water from the tank, because if not, then the second explosion would happen due to overheating and the reactor core melting. If there's one nitpick for the episode, it's that Shcherbyna went from being a big douchebag to a good guy in just the span of one episode, which is a bit rushed, but it's just a minor flaw. Then we have episode 3, which is titled Open Wide, O Earth for some reason. But despite the strange episode title, this episode is still a solid episode from beginning to end. More new problems arise. First of all, on the previous episode, I legit thought the 3 volunteers would die and fail the mission. But thanks to my lack of research, I am quite happy to see them succeeded. Yeah, they succeeded. But then another problem came up. The melting speed of the reactor core was faster than anticipated. So Legasov had this idea to use up all the liquid nitrogen in the USSR and install heat exchangers a few meters right underneath the reactor core with the help of some coal miners. But then it got so hot down there, all the coal miners were bare naked. But what really hits hard about the episode is the people in the control room and the firefighters who were the first to contact with the radiation, and damn, they were really decaying. Their skin was wearing off, they were bleeding everywhere, they all had pizza skin, and trust me, it's very hard to look at. Huge hats off to the makeup team, it looks so real and horrifying. Yolana was in the hospital in Moscow interviewing Akimov and Toptanov, trying to find out why exactly did the reactor core blow up, and it was shocking to find out that it blew up only because Akimov tried to emergency shut down the reactor. This episode also gets a little political when Shcherbyna told Legasov that they were always followed by people, so Legasov just straight up confronted the chairperson of KGB. Yeah, he did that. It wasn't a great idea. Nope. And the last few minutes of the episode are really saddening and tragic. Vasily's wife and other families and friends of the deceased watched as they pour steel over their loved ones' coffins, and it was really haunting. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl. Episode 4 is titled The Happiness of All Mankind, and it feels like an even more different episode than the first 3. It's a really depressing episode with 3 storylines depicting each side of the aftermath. So we have a time jump. Yeah, a time jump. Of about 3 months, the military and the civilians are getting conscripted and recruited to join the Chernobyl cleaners. They are assigned to destroy radioactive earth and crops, evacuate villages, kill radioactive animals, and clean everything. In the first scene, Pip from the Night's Watch is now a soldier in Chernobyl who killed a cow who's being milked by this old woman because they need to evacuate the village. Then we also see a normal civilian, Pavel, who had to work with 2 other soldiers to kill all the radioactive dogs. There are so many dogs in Ukraine for some reason. And of course, Pavel had never killed anything before, so it was hard for him to kill for the first few times. And this storyline just radiates sadness. It feels like a post-apocalyptic aftermath, except it's more like post-Chernobyl. Meanwhile, Yolana had been doing research finding out why the reactor core exploded, and at the same time, Legasov and Shcherbyna wanted to use robots to clean up the reactor building roofs because humans just can't stand that radiation. And there are 3 rooftops on the reactor building. 2 of them are not as radioactive as the third one, and they can use Russian robots to clear them up. But for the third one, they needed to use a robot that could withstand that radiation. So the government got Shcherbyna, a German robot, and it just straight up died because the Russian government gave Germans the propaganda number, so the robot wasn't going to work at all. So at the end, they have to actually use men to clear the rooftops. And that is the most intense scene I've watched in Chernobyl. One of the scenes is literally a long take of a group of men in hazmat suits clearing up the most dangerous place ever, and they had 90 seconds. If they stay longer than that, they die. The scene was really, really well shot. It's completely handheld, it's shaky. I feel like I was in this with them. And then we have the dosimeter sound, which gets very loud and intense every time they go near the reactor core and every time they go near a piece of graphite. And at the end, 90 seconds were up, and one of them tripped over and fell, and one of the rocks on the rooftops cut open his shoe. So yes, he's fucked. Other than that, at the end, Yulana told Legasov why the reactor core exploded, and Legasov decided to tell that to the world, which would put him in a lot of danger. At least that's what it looks like at the end of episode 4. So yes, overall, I like this episode for how depressing and intense it is. The last episode is titled Vichnaya Pamyat, which is Russian for eternal memories, which is basically rest in peace. And again, the plot of this episode is basically completely different than all of the first 4 episodes. We get a huge time jump to 1 year later, where Legasov had already attended the conference in Vienna, lied about the reactors, and came back, and the chief of KGB congratulated him on lying. But for the most part of the episode, Dyatlov, Bryukhanov, and Fomin are on trial, while Legasov, Shcherbyna, and Yulana are providing evidence against them, providing testimonials. Shcherbyna, Yulana, and Legasov all came out and spoke about how this incident occurred and why were those 3 guilty. And actually, Legasov gave a really stunning testimony about how did the RBMK reactor explode. It's lies. Lies are the reason that it exploded. And we get these flashback scenes interjected during their testimonies, and we see all the things come together, which has ultimately led to the explosion, how Dyatlov forced a bunch of inexperienced workers to perform this test, how they accidentally poisoned the reactor with xenon, how the reactivity dropped and they tried to pull the reactor cores out, raising the reactivity. Then the final mistake is pressing the AZ5 button, where they wanted to put the reactor cores back in to stop the reactivity from rising, except the tips of the reactor core are made out of graphite for some reason, which accelerates the reactivity, so boom. And the episode ends off with the KGB guy threatening Legasov, stripping away all of his titles and jobs, threatening him to live alone and not make any friends at all until the end of time, which is incredibly sad and doesn't justify what him and Shcherbyna did. So, you know what happened a few months later. And the episode ended off with a very bittersweet and painful epilogue, actually more bitter than sweet, talking about the death toll of Chernobyl and how both Legasov and Shcherbyna died at the end. And it's incredibly haunting and saddening. Overall, Chernobyl, the HBO miniseries, really surprised me a lot. Not only because it's a dead-on, historically accurate TV show, which is already impressive in and of itself, but it's crazy how the writers can adapt something that had happened in reality and turn it into a 5-parted miniseries very smoothly and naturally and eventfully. Yes, radiation is bad, but I never thought Chernobyl is this bad. The horror and the terror being depicted in this miniseries is truly humbling. And the worst part in that is that it's real. It really happened. Wow. That's crazy. There are a couple of storylines that feel kind of irrelevant, like Pavel being conscripted or the Ignatenko storyline. But all of those storylines tell a different part of that story, which I think is fantastic. The acting is great. Jared Harris and Stellan Skarsgård are phenomenal. The disturbing, ambient, droney soundtrack by Hildur Guðnadóttir is chilling, and Emmys are waiting to be handed to Craig Mazin and Johan Renck. My favorite episode is episode 1, 2, and 5, I guess. All of them are just equally as great, actually. I guess episode 2 stuck out to me the most, but I mean, episode 5 is a close contender as well. And my least favorite episode, I don't really have one. I don't. I guess episode 3 is not as appealing as others. And I'm saying Chernobyl is mind-blowing, and I'm giving it a strong 9 out of 10. So have you watched Chernobyl? From 1 to 10, how much did you rate it? Like if you like it, hate if you hate it, and subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching.